Hello, everyone. My name is Swap. I'm the Executive Director of Media at McKinney. We appreciate you tuning in. To start, let me paint you a picture. We're 7 months into grappling with a global pandemic, and yet there's still uncertainty about what the winter months will bring. 13 million Americans are unemployed, and at the same time, the stock market is nearing record highs. Many of us are working remotely, and if you're a parent, that means every day is pretty much bring your kids to work day. Tensions have boiled over. There's nationwide social unrest, and for better or worse, all four major sports leagues are playing at the same time for the first time in history. That's a welcome distraction for many. All this while, we're less than a month away from one of the most polarizing presidential elections in history. So, welcome to the shit show. That's what we've lovingly coined Q4 planning this year. I mean, it really is like no other. We all know that brands have had to pivot the last 2 quarters. Similarly, Q4 will require a different playbook than years past, which have typically been very predictable. Based on everything, the tension, the pressure, the clutter crammed all into Q4, we think marketers will likely need to evolve their plans even more significantly than previously anticipated. Because, well, the next 3 months really will be a shit show. To talk through their research and give us some ideas on how to confidently navigate the way forward, I'm joined by the 3 directors of strategy from McKinney's offices in LA, Durham, and Los Angeles. Kat Eagan from Durham, Jasmine Dadlani from New York, and Anita Schillhorn from Los Angeles. Anita, Kat, and Jasmine, collectively you guys have fielded 4 waves of quantitative research since March to keep a pulse on consumer sentiment and behavior. Based on what you've learned, what should brands do to stand out this 4th quarter?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Swap. I mean, I think you've captured it really well. Times right now are a bit shit. So our thesis is pretty simple. Brands can and should seek to help people feel 10% better, and in doing so, win over new consumers and customers and galvanize their loyalists. You know, brands can't solve everything, but we think that brands have a unique opportunity to help us feel incrementally better right now in small but meaningful ways. There's a lot of talk right now, I think, about divisiveness, and we certainly saw that in our data in spades. But what's not well publicized is all these other feelings that we're sharing right now, regardless of where we live, our political ideologies, income levels, race and age, all of these things that mean we're experiencing things differently don't necessarily mean that our feelings are different.
Yeah, we've been tracking people's emotions over 4 waves of our study now, and we've uncovered inherently universal emotions, and they definitely tend to be more negative amongst all the participants. Strikingly, over 50% of our study respondents across the board are just flat out angry and frustrated right now. For example, those 2 emotions have peaked in this 4th wave.
And, you know, piling on to the bad news, people don't really see it getting any better between now and the end of the year. You know, it's surprising. Even after the election, they expect things to still feel pretty bad. But even more frustratingly, they don't really know how it's going to all go down. The certainty and the confidence in what they believe is going to happen is really low. There's only one thing that everyone seems to be very confident about, and unfortunately, that's that we're going to be even more divided.
Our research also suggested that people are looking forward to things that are going to lift their spirits. So we have a little bit of hope, right? And this in particular is where we think brands can make a difference.
Yeah, so even with that little bit of optimism, it sounds pretty bleak overall. Do you think there's really hope, and what should brands do about it?
I mean, you called it the shit show for a reason, Swap. So yeah, it is bleak, but that's where brands who get it and who act can really thrive, right? This is a huge opportunity for brands. It's all about understanding the simple human insights behind those universal struggles that Kat mentioned that we're all having, that we're all struggling with. And in our research, we saw a myriad emotions come up, but they all seem to ladder up to 3 primary emotions. And that's what brands can really help people tackle. So the first is a feeling of being very restricted. Next is overall feeling very conflicted, which actually has a lot of different pieces in it, including what I mentioned earlier, that we're not entirely confident about how we think things are going to go down. And finally, feeling overwhelmed. We're going to get more into each of these in a minute.
The other thing that you're going to notice is that we are going to be sharing suggestions today about what brands should be doing in this time. And a lot of it's less about what brands should say and more about what they can actually do.
So restricted, conflicted, and overwhelmed. Let's start with restriction a little bit here. What can brands do to help people feel a little bit less restricted? And businesses, I mean, they can't just lift their safety protocols. And so what are they to do?
Right, yeah. Look, it's not at all surprising that people are feeling constrained by the events of this year, right? But when thinking about it globally, it is interesting from an American standpoint that this feeling fundamentally goes against our craving for freedom. And what we didn't expect to see was that people don't anticipate it getting better anytime soon. When it comes to things like travel, going out socially, even sending kids to school, respondents overwhelmingly felt like we'd be just as restricted, if not more so, by the end of the year.
And to your point, Swap, about businesses being restricted as well, I mean, this is an interesting tension because in a lot of cases, businesses are even more restricted than consumers. For example, we work with Choice Hotels, and in a category like travel, brands can't really tell people to just feel free to wander. That would be incongruous with safety protocols and, with people's very valid fears about their health. But what they can do is give people a sense of freedom when they feel like they have none. So, for example, we've seen travel brands doing away with cancellation fees, which gives people more sense of flexibility.
Yeah, and along with those choices, another thing brands can do is give people permission to look forward, to feel optimistic. We saw a recent travel industry study that found that just the simple act of having a trip planned made 97% of people happier. They just needed to see it on the calendar. So tapping into that future optimism is really a welcome way to make your customers feel a little bit better about your brands.
Yeah, that I can relate to that. But what about all the things that people have had to miss because of COVID? I can sense that people are longing for a sense of freedom to do what they want, when they want, and with whomever they want because they're missing so many things.
Yeah, I can take this one. People definitely feel like they've missed out on a lot this year. And these restrictions have really isolated us. And why that matters is because our typical markers of time, birthdays, holidays, graduations, even births and deaths, they've all been upended. It makes us feel like we're adrift, like time is moving, but nothing changes. I feel like that all the time. And it's not actually because these things aren't happening, they are, but it's more that they simply don't feel as significant because we can't share them with each other.
The flip side of that, though, is that people have gotten really creative with how they have commemorated these moments. We've seen activities like drive-by birthdays, virtual weddings. Where I am in Los Angeles, for example, restaurants no longer need a license to take up sidewalk or street space for outdoor seating, and it's completely transformed whole city blocks. So even as individuals, we're being asked to innovate in this time because we have so many restrictions. And there's room for brands to provide more innovative service models too. For example, in the holidays, people are going to miss those moments of conviviality, like going to holiday parties or holiday markets. And brands like a tech brand could explore recreating that in a virtual way.
Yeah, I think that feeling of restriction is one that is universally felt right now. What about this feeling of conflict? I assume that's tied to this growing divisiveness that's amongst us. So run at that for a little bit and should brands jump into that fray?
Yeah, divisiveness is definitely a part of it. That political divide is for sure felt universally right now. And it's a source of a lot of the anger and frustration that Anita was talking about earlier. In fact, we were surprised to see that the political division and social unrest, above everything else, was considered to be worse than the state of the economy, the state of people's personal finances, and even the state of the pandemic.
Right. But Kat, wouldn't you say brands have to tread really lightly here? Not many brands want or have the long-term equity to really tackle political division. But what's interesting is there's another big division that's happening, which is the increasing economic division amongst Americans. The divide between have and have nots has just grown so much larger in this period of time. On one hand, 1 in 3 Americans are struggling to feed their families. That is staggering. On the other, there's this significant group of people who find themselves with more disposable income than ever, and they're not sure how to spend it all, and they feel a little bit guilty and judged as a result, right? So just imagine, like, if every brand, for example, adopted some version, their version of the buy one, give one model in Q4. How great would that be?
And brands shouldn't forget the pragmatic side also. Some of the things that our research revealed was that while consumers say it's their duty to stop spending money with companies that do something they don't agree with, they are actually making purchase decisions on those practical needs. Where can they find the best deal or get the quickest shipping? The value equation still has a lot of power along with brand purpose.
Yeah.
And did you find that this divisiveness is just one aspect of this feeling of conflict, or is there more to it than that?
Oh, the conflict, was all over the place. It was really one of the more unexpected findings, just in terms of not even conflict within society, internal conflict. So I'm not even sure if my beliefs are in agreement with each other, if my attitudes and my beliefs follow. So there's just a lot of, negative emotion that I have internally from not knowing what I really should believe. And there's a lot of examples of that across many topics explored in the research. So speaking about the pandemic, for example, there's a lot of people who are really worried and are taking precautions so that they don't infect friends and family. But when you ask people, talk to us about the upcoming holidays. Are you still going to gather? Yes, they are. Are you going to hug your relatives with abandon? Yes, they are. So that's an example of that dissonance. Another one closer to home for marketers is when it comes to shopping, everyone now claims they want to be, supporting small businesses, they want to buy local, but as Anita mentioned earlier, they're still pragmatic. Those practical needs are going to take over, and 2/3 are still planning to buy items that are, just the least expensive regardless of where they come from.
So in this case, what we asked ourselves was, how can brands shorten that distance between our beliefs and our behaviors as consumers? And this is a really good place, we think, for retailers to lean in, because so often we want to feel good about our purchases, right? So for example, if a big box retailer gave a platform for local and small businesses, or even if a large online retailer gave shoppers the option to round up their purchase amount, to contribute to a tip to delivery men or women, shoppers, they're always looking for a reason to rationalize their purchases. So, small things go a really long way here.
Yeah, so you guys have covered this idea of restriction and conflict, and you also mentioned overwhelmed. Q4 is overwhelming for a lot of people. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, overwhelmed is spot on. But as you said up front, it's even more than that. It really feels like a shit show, right? Things that used to be routine, like sending your kid to school, now feel like life and death decisions. And we are all just tired and tired of it. So recognizing how exhausted consumers are after months and months of this is really important. And those emotions of overwhelm and exhaustion are really universally spiking right now. So brands might look at a way to take a thing or two off of people's plates, right? For example, as we enter this big shopping season, brands should consider how to make shopping as easy as possible. For example, can they stimulate that one-stop shopping convenience of malls for multiple brands that they love?
Yeah, and there's more to the overwhelmingness and exhaustion. Another thing that contributes is that general sense of uncertainty that I think we talked about earlier. One of the most interesting things we found in the research was that people have no confidence when it comes to their outlooks at the end of the year. So they just really don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know about you all, but thank God for alcohol and thank God for food. Because food's my comfort zone. And Q4 is all about food. And that's a place where particularly heritage brands, but just any comfort foods, like pizza, can really think about how can they help deal with some of that uncertainty? How can they provide some of that reassurance and help people pivot for a really weird Q4? For example, holiday meals, they're normally huge gatherings. How do they now redo all their recipes so that they're better for, turkey for 4 rather than turkey for 20. But one thing to caution on is it shouldn't always be touchy-feely. You know, the holidays kind of have this sense of like warmth and caring and togetherness, and that's great for the right brands. But there are other brands, like we see, you know, working with a brand like Little Caesars, for example, where they should just lean really heavily into humor, because that's what people are craving right now. People need some levity. So that's an area where brands might want to be even more loose than what they've planned already.
Yeah, that's a good point. And speaking of these sharing moments and traditions, I mean, part of that's something we've been missing all throughout this year, but I imagine that's going to be even more keenly felt during the holidays.
Yes, absolutely. This is where I think there's some silver lining. We were surprised to see that people across the board are looking to this holiday season to make up for such a shitty year. Essentially, almost 70% of our respondents said the holiday season is a really important moment to lift our spirits. And 49% said that they actually plan to go the extra mile to make this holiday special. And that was really interesting to us, even as only 42% of those respondents said they were likely to gather with family, right? So when you're thinking about how they're going to make the holidays particularly special this year, you know, one thing that people said they were going to do is actually spend more on gifts. 40% of our respondents said that. And that's both contrary to what we've seen in the past from recessionary years like 2008, 2009, but it's also contrary to what respondents told us about needing to be conservative with their spending right now.
One great example of that is Walmart's WonderLab website that they launched for the holidays. It allows kids to unbox, test, and play with this year's hottest toys without leaving home. And that's an awesome example of brands that are helping parents to keep some of that special holiday magic alive.
Love that.
So Swap, I don't know, I feel like you've kind of pegged us with a lot of questions. I think it might be your turn.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so you're the media guru, and we know that brands are diversifying their media mixes and really keeping in mind all the restrictions and changing consumption habits. But what other media advice do you have for brands trying to navigate the shit show in Q4?
You know, I am proud of a lot of the changes that are happening to kind of match the changing media consumption habits of consumers during these times. I'm often walking around the office saying the term "everything is media," and when you think about an overlooked brand touch point, it's a lot of the owned assets. Think about the packaging those gifts and toys are sent in. Think about the storefront exterior that is now all of a sudden so much more prominent when people are picking up stuff in curbside pickups. Think about like the voicemail or the on hold sound bites that exist when people are on hold to, you know, get to your customer service personnel. So what can we do from that standpoint, and how do we make use of that in a really impactful and powerful way?
Yeah, I love the idea of finding those small touch points. That's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing a lot of your input and research and smarts. Let's conclude with your takeaways that brands should keep in mind to keep to win during the shit show.
Well, we want to start with the sense of being restricted. You know, we know that people are feeling that sense of restriction, and what brands can do is give them a sense of freedom. And even if it's not overarching freedom, you can give them a little bit more choice, a little bit more flexibility, so that they can feel a little bit more in control at this moment when we all feel so out of control.
Yeah, and in terms of feeling conflicted, again, this is both on a societal and on an individual level. So while there's boundaries on what brands can do, really anything that makes consumers feel more resolved, more validated in their decision-making, not have to second guess, more secure in general with their feelings and their attitudes about the things around them, that's going to really endear them to your brand.
Brands really have an opportunity to unburden us a bit, to take some things off of our plates and simplify things for us this year, even as they're enticing us to engage with them and purchase their products.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your input. Thanks for everyone that tuned in. If anyone wants to see our full report with the research and insights, go to McKinney.com.